Hello. I ask for your subscription to grow the channel and increasingly improve the quality of the stories. And now, let's get started. I need to document this while I'm still completely here. Parts of me are already missing. Not physically, but in reflections, in photographs, in memories. Sometimes I catch glimpses of the rest of myself in mirrors, existing in that other place. But people need to know the truth about the disappearances at Lake Okeechobee. The pattern emerged slowly at first. 12 RVs found abandoned over 6 months, each scene pristine except for the complete absence of their occupants. Coffee still steaming in mugs, TVs still playing to empty rooms, phones mid-conversation on tables. No signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play, just people who stepped out of reality between one moment and the next. The first warning should have been the way objects shifted when I wasn't looking directly at them. Setting up my surveillance equipment in my grand design reflection, I'd place a camera in one spot only to find it inches away seconds later. The locals called it the slide. That subtle shift when things weren't quite where you left them, as if reality itself was loose around the edges. Maria Blackhawk, an elderly Seminole woman who lived near the campground, watched me set up my investigation with growing concern. "They're not missing," she said, her eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. "They're collected. There's a difference." I dismissed her words as local superstition, focused only on my evidence boards and surveillance feeds. That first night in my RV, I reviewed the historical footage of the disappearances. Each video showed the same impossible thing: people walking normally, then seeming to slide sideways into nothing between one frame and the next. No distortion, no visual effects, just there one moment and gone the next, as if they'd stepped through an invisible door. The anomalies in my investigation multiplied rapidly. Every mirror and window in my RV began showing slightly different versions of reality. Curtains moving in winds that didn't exist, empty chairs that weren't empty in the reflection, shadows that moved against the light. The surveillance cameras captured people who hadn't been at the campground for months, walking through walls as if they were still there. My dreams became filled with impossible spaces, endless corridors of RVs where every window showed a different moment of disappearance. Every reflection contained another lost soul. The worst part was recognizing the faces. Missing people I'd investigated over the years, all existing simultaneously in this strange other world, forever caught in the moment of their vanishing. Maria appeared at my RV again, her reflection showing multiple versions of herself at different ages. She spoke of the collector, not a person or creature, but a space between spaces that had developed a fascination with human moments. She showed me ancient Seminole warnings carved into cypress trees, depicting figures half-stepped into another world, forever suspended between here and there. The surveillance footage became increasingly disturbing. Time-lapse videos showed people flickering in and out of existence, sometimes appearing in multiple places simultaneously, their movements stuttering like badly edited film. In some frames, they seemed aware of their situation, pounding silently on invisible barriers between realities. The pull of the anomaly grew stronger as I identified the pattern's center, a spot near the old flood control structure they called the doorway. Every disappearance had occurred within a 100-foot radius of this point, and strange visual distortions appeared in any photograph taken of the area. The air itself seemed to ripple there, like heat waves rising from hot pavement, but the effect was stronger at night. The changes accelerated as I moved my RV closer to the doorway. Reality became fluid, unreliable. Time flowed strangely. I'd find myself staring at my reflection for what felt like minutes, only to discover hours had passed. The windows of my RV showed different times of day in each pane, and sometimes I'd catch glimpses of other versions of myself moving through parallel moments. In the surveillance monitors, I began seeing them clearly, the collected ones. They existed in a state of perpetual, almost vanishing, their forms rippling like heat mirages. Some were recent disappearances, still solid enough to cast shadows. Others were older, faded like old photographs, endlessly repeating their final moments before collection. They moved through our reality like underwater dancers, graceful and terrifying in their half-existence. The collector made its presence known through distortions in space itself. Objects would fold in impossible ways, creating doorways into spaces that shouldn't exist. Through these gaps, I caught glimpses of its gallery, an endless expanse of frozen moments, each containing a perfectly preserved specimen of humanity at the exact second of their disappearance. The beauty of it was as horrifying as its implications. My investigation notes became confused, pages showing different text depending on the angle of viewing. Photographs developed in impossible colors, showing people in various stages of collection. Some still fully in our reality, others barely more than outlines in the air. The collector was showing me its work, proud as any artist of its carefully curated collection of moments. Maria's final warning came too late. "It doesn't just take them," she said, her form flickering between ages as she spoke. "It preserves them in their most perfect moment of realization, that second when they understand they're being collected. That's the moment it keeps forever." I should have listened, but by then I could already feel myself beginning to slide sideways into somewhere else. The night of the convergence brought impossible clarity. Every reflective surface in my RV became a window into the collector's gallery. I watched as past victims lived their final moments again and again. A young woman reaching for her coffee cup, an old man turning a page in his book, a child laughing at something just out of frame, each perfectly preserved in their last second of normalcy. My cameras captured the process of my own partial collection. Frame by frame, I watched as parts of myself began to desynchronize from reality. My movements left trailing after images in the air, each one showing a slightly different version of the same action. The collector was sampling me, testing different moments to find the perfect one to preserve. The barrier between realities thinned to transparency. Through every window, I could see both worlds simultaneously, our solid, mundane reality overlaid with the fluid, impossible space of the collection. The collected ones reached out to me, their faces showing neither fear nor pain, but a strange ecstasy of perpetual revelation. They had become living art in the collector's gallery. My attempt to document the phenomenon became part of the collection itself. Each photograph I took, each note I wrote, began to exist in multiple states simultaneously. The evidence of my investigation split and multiplied like fractals, creating an infinite regression of observations about observations. I was documenting my own transformation into an exhibit. The moment of partial collection felt like being stretched across multiple dimensions. Part of me remained anchored in normal space, but another part slid sideways into the collection. The sensation wasn't painful. It was more like being gently unfocused, my existence smeared across multiple possible moments. The collector had decided to preserve me in the act of discovery itself. I'm writing this from my RV, though I'm not entirely sure which version of it is real anymore. Parts of me exist permanently in the collection now, preserved in that perfect moment of understanding. When I look in mirrors, I see dozens of versions of myself, each caught in a slightly different moment of revelation. Some are still writing this warning. Others are eternally reading it. The collected ones are always visible to me now, living their preserved moments in an endless loop. Through every reflection, every window, I see them, the perfect specimens in the collector's gallery. Sometimes they notice me watching and pause in their eternal moments to wave, their faces showing that same expression of horrified wonder that I now know is permanently frozen on parts of my own face. To anyone planning to visit Lake Okeechobee, stay away from the doorway. Don't investigate the strange ripples in reality. Don't follow the half-seen movements and reflections. And if you start noticing that things aren't quite where you left them, if your reflections start moving independently, run. Run before the Okeechobee collector finds your perfect moment before you become another carefully preserved specimen in its infinite gallery. The process of collection continues slowly. Each day, I find more parts of myself preserved in that other space, more moments of my existence carefully curated and displayed. The collector is patient, methodical, selecting only the most perfect instances to add to its exhibition. Sometimes, I feel it watching me through my own eyes, deciding which version of me to keep next. This is my final warning. There are things at Lake Okeechobee that exist beyond our understanding of reality and time. They've been collecting people for centuries, preserving them in moments of perfect revelation. The disappearances aren't endings. They're transformations into something eternal and terrible. Stay away from the doorway. Stay. The text continues. In multiple variations, each showing a slightly different version of the same warning, spreading across the page like ripples in still water. I need to write this while I can still distinguish reality from desire. The visions never stop now, perfect versions of my patients, healed and whole, beckoning me to join them in their eternal bliss. My psychiatric training means nothing against the pure seduction of seeing everyone I failed to help now living their perfect lives. But people need to know the truth about the disappearances at Matthew's Arm. When I first arrived in my Winnebago, the case seemed straightforward enough. 7 people had vanished over 3 months, leaving their RVs immaculate but empty. As a specialist in dissociative fugues, I'd seen similar patterns before. But these disappearances were different. The victims left behind journals filled with increasingly vivid descriptions of their deepest desires becoming reality. The first warning sign came in the video footage. Security cameras showed the missing people engaged in animated conversations with empty air in the days before they vanished. But their body language was perfect, responding to invisible figures that seemed to be offering them everything they'd ever wanted. Their faces showed pure joy, even as they spoke to nothing. Sarah Two Rivers, an elderly Cherokee woman who lived near the campground, watched me reviewing the footage with growing concern. They weren't talking to nothing, she said, her eyes tracking something I couldn't see. The Weaver was showing them what they needed to see. It knows what we want better than we do. I dismissed her words as folklore, focused on my clinical analysis. That first night in my RV, I dreamed of my patients. Not as they were, broken and struggling, but as they could be. They were whole, healed, living their best lives. Each one smiled at me with perfect understanding, grateful for a cure I hadn't yet provided. I woke to find my clinical notes transformed into detailed descriptions of these visions, written in my own hand, but with no memory of writing them. The case files began changing subtly each time I reviewed them. The missing people's histories shifted focus from their disappearances to their desires, what they wanted most, what they would give anything to achieve. Their journal entries became more vivid, describing encounters with something that could read their deepest wishes and offer them fulfillment. My dreams filled with scenes from my therapy sessions, but altered. Each patient achieved breakthrough. After breakthrough, their traumas dissolving under my care. The visions were so perfect, so complete, everything I'd ever wanted to achieve as a therapist. I'd wake to find new case notes describing successful treatments I'd never performed, therapeutic techniques that couldn't exist. Sarah appeared at my RV again, her presence somehow more and less than human. She spoke of the Weaver, an entity that had existed in these mountains since before the Cherokee, feeding on human desires. Not just base wants, but the deepest, most profound longings of the soul. She showed me ancient warnings carved into trees, depicting figures following their own perfected selves into oblivion. The surveillance footage revealed more with each viewing. In the static between frames, I began to see what the missing people saw, shimmering manifestations of everything they'd ever wanted. A mother's lost child, whole and healthy again. An addict's clean future. An athlete's unbroken body. Or the Weaver was offering them all a chance to step into their perfect lives. My psychological training began to work against me, as I recognized the patterns of desire and fulfillment playing out in the disappearances. Each victim had been shown progressively more perfect versions of their lives until the reality they left behind seemed pale and empty in comparison. The clinical part of my mind knew this was dangerous, but another part wondered, what if they were actually being healed? The Weaver began appearing in my therapy sessions, not physically, but in the possibilities it showed me. Each time I reviewed my cases, I saw new ways to help, perfect interventions that would heal even the most traumatized patients. The visions were becoming more vivid, more tangible, until I could almost reach out and touch the healed versions of my patients standing before me. My RV became a gallery of potential cures. Every surface reflected different versions of successful treatments. Journals documented breakthrough sessions that hadn't happened yet. Video recordings showed therapy techniques that broke all known psychological boundaries. The line between my real patients and their perfected versions began to blur. The missing people's cases revealed a pattern I should have recognized sooner. Each victim had been a caregiver in some way. Nurses, teachers, parents, people whose deepest desires revolved around helping others. The Weaver wasn't just offering them their own fulfillment, it was showing them a world where everyone they cared about was healed and whole. Sarah's final visit came with a cost. She appeared in my RV looking decades younger, her eyes filled with ancient knowledge. "The Weaver doesn't just show you what you want," she said, her form flickering between ages. "It shows you what you could be, the perfect version of yourself, achieving everything you've ever dreamed." By then, I was already seeing myself as the therapist who could heal everyone. My clinical notes transformed into prophecies of perfect cures. Each page described treatments that transcended traditional therapy, ways to heal not just minds but souls. The rational part of me knew these were impossible, but the Weaver was offering something beyond rationality, a chance to become the healer I'd always wanted to be. The night of the full moon brought impossible clarity. Every inch of the pleasure ground radiated with potential. The air itself seemed to shimmer with unrealized desires. I watched as perfect versions of my patients walked among the trees, each one healed and whole, beckoning me to join them in their perpetual fulfillment. Weaver revealed itself not through horror, but through pure seduction. It manifested as a symphony of healing, the sound of trauma dissolving, the sight of broken minds becoming whole, the feeling of perfect therapeutic success. Each sensation was more intoxicating than the last, promising that all my patients' pain could end with a single choice. My attempt to maintain professional distance crumbled as the entity showed me everything I could achieve. In the pleasure ground, I saw myself as the ultimate healer, a therapist who could cure any trauma, heal any wound, restore any broken mind. The vision was so perfect, so complete, that reality began to seem like a pale shadow in comparison. The missing people were there, living in their moments of perfect fulfillment. I saw them clearly now, not trapped, but transformed. Each one existed in a state of perpetual healing, experiencing the joy of their perfect lives again and again. Their faces showed neither fear nor regret, only the ecstasy of eternal satisfaction. The moment of choice felt like being offered everything I'd ever wanted as a therapist. The Weaver showed me a world where every patient could be healed, where trauma ceased to exist, where my therapeutic skills could achieve the impossible. All I had to do was step forward and accept my role as the perfect healer. I'm writing this from my office in the city, but the visions never stop. Perfect versions of my patients walk through my walls, showing me their healed lives, beckoning me to join them in the pleasure ground. Every mirror reflects what could have been, the ultimate therapist I almost became, eternally healing every broken soul she encounters. The Weaver's influence lingers in every therapy session. I see double now, my real patients struggling with their issues overlaid with shimmering images of their perfectly healed selves. Sometimes I catch myself reaching out to touch these visions, to pull them into reality, and I have to grip my chair to stay grounded. To anyone planning to visit, Matthews Arm Campground. Stay away from the pleasure ground during the full moon. Don't listen when you start seeing perfect versions of your life playing out before you. And if you're a healer, a helper, someone who wants to fix others, run. Run before the Weaver shows you everything you could achieve, before it offers you the power to heal everyone at the cost of your own reality. The perfect versions of my patients visit me every night now, their faces radiating joy and gratitude for cures I never actually provided. I see them in my dreams, in reflections, in the spaces between moments. The Weaver keeps showing me how easy it would be to join them, to become the healer who can fix everyone. Sometimes, in my weakest moments, I still consider accepting its offer. This is my final warning. There are things in Shenandoah that know our deepest desires, entities that can offer us everything we've ever wanted. They've been feeding on human longings for centuries, transforming people into eternal moments of perfect fulfillment. The disappearances aren't endings, they're transformations into something beautiful and terrible. Stay away from the pleasure ground. Stay. The text continues, with descriptions of perfect therapeutic breakthroughs, each more impossible and seductive than the last. I need to record this while my memories are still anchored in this reality. The bone tokens I collected whisper to me constantly now, showing me visions of what lies beyond our world. Each carved piece tells a story of willing transformation, of power beyond human comprehension. But people need to know the truth about what's happening at Rio Grande Village. When I first arrived in my airstream, the desert seemed to vibrate with ancient power. The Rio Grande flowed like a boundary between worlds, and the mountains watched with patient malevolence. I was drawn to the burn circles immediately, perfect blackened rings where RVs had simply ceased to exist, leaving behind only small, intricately carved pieces of bone. The first warning came when I touched one of the bone tokens. The vision hit me like a physical blow. I was experiencing someone's last moments in our reality, not as a victim, but as an initiate. They were eager, exhilarated, their body trembling with anticipation as ancient words of power transformed them into something glorious and terrible. Manuel Ramirez, an elderly curandero who lived near the campground, watched me collecting the bone tokens with growing concern. "Each one is a story," he said, refusing to touch them. "Not of death, but of becoming." They left these as invitations. I dismissed his words as superstition, focused on my paranormal readings. That first night in my RV, the bone tokens began to sing, not with sound, but with visions, each piece showing me fragments of the ritual that had transformed its owner. I saw people willingly stepping into circles of fire, their bodies dissolving into light as they passed into another dimension. The ecstasy on their faces was more terrifying than any expression of fear could have been. The paranormal activity intensified with each passing day. My EMF meters detected patterns that formed complex geometric shapes in the air, and my audio recordings captured chants in languages that made my teeth ache. But it was the bone tokens that provided the real evidence. Each one was a window into the moment of transformation. My dreams became full of ancient rituals, not reconstructions or imaginings, but perfect memories stored in the carved bones. I saw the true nature of Los Hambrientos, beings of pure energy and consciousness that had evolved beyond physical form. They didn't want to kill us. They wanted to teach us how to transcend our limited existence. Manuel appeared at my RV again, his eyes reflecting knowledge too vast for human minds. He spoke of the crossing, not a death or an ending, but a transformation into something greater. The burn circles weren't marks of destruction. They were doorways, points where our reality grew thin enough for willing participants to pass through. The investigation tapes began showing impossible things, shadows that moved against the light, forming shapes that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. The air above each burn circle rippled like heat waves, but my thermal camera showed them to be colder than the surrounding desert. Something was pressing against the boundary between worlds. As the solstice approached, the bone tokens grew more active. They arranged themselves in patterns while I slept, forming complex diagrams that I recognized from ancient petroglyphs in the area. Each pattern was part of a larger design, not just a ritual circle, but a key to unlocking the doorway between dimensions. The bone tokens began their true work as the solstice drew near. Each piece started resonating with memories not just of past transformations, but of the knowledge that drove people to choose transcendence. I saw what they had seen, visions of existence beyond physical form, of consciousness evolved beyond human limitations. In my RV, reality began to buckle. The The walls would ripple with geometrical patterns that hurt my eyes to look at, and sometimes I'd catch glimpses of the transformed ones through the distortions. They were beautiful in their impossibility, beings of pure energy and thought, existing in dimensions our minds weren't meant to comprehend. Their presence filled me with a longing I couldn't explain. Each night brought new revelations through the bone tokens. I experienced the moments when previous victims had made their choice, not driven by fear or desperation, but by an overwhelming desire to evolve beyond their human forms. They hadn't disappeared. They had transcended, leaving behind these carved pieces as breadcrumbs for others to follow. Manuel's final visit came with a price. He appeared in my RV without warning, his form somehow less solid than before. Los hambrientos don't take, he said, his voice echoing from multiple points in space. They offer, but once you see what they show you, returning to normal existence becomes difficult. His eyes held the knowledge of someone who had glimpsed beyond the veil and chosen to remain behind. The solstice approached, and with it came understanding. The burn circles weren't random. They formed a larger pattern across the landscape, a vast ritual circle that only became complete on specific astronomical alignments. The disappearing RVs weren't accidents. They were positioned by an influence that had been drawing people to the right places at the right times for centuries. The solstice night brought impossible clarity. The air itself seemed to crystallize with potential, and the bone tokens pulsed with an inner light that cast no shadows. Through their carved surfaces, I could see the other side, a realm of pure consciousness where physical form was merely optional, where thought and energy danced in patterns too beautiful for human minds to comprehend. Los Hambrientos revealed themselves not as monsters, but as artists of transformation. They existed in the spaces between moments, in dimensions that intersected with ours only under specific conditions. Through the bone tokens, they showed me what humanity could become, beings of pure thought and energy, freed from the limitations of flesh and linear time. The ritual, ground activated as the alignment reached its peak. The burn circles connected, with lines of force that became visible to human eyes, forming a gateway between realities. Through my cameras, I captured glimpses of the transformed ones, previous victims, now evolved into forms of pure light and geometry. Their consciousness expanded beyond anything I could have imagined. In the center of the pattern, where all the lines converged, reality itself began to fold open. The air split along mathematical lines, revealing glimpses of what existed beyond our limited perception of space and time. The transformed ones moved through these gaps with impossible grace, their forms shifting between states of matter and energy. The moment of choice felt like standing on the edge of evolution itself. Through the bone tokens, Los Hambrientos offered me everything: transcendence, understanding, existence beyond the constraints of physical form. The desire to step forward, to allow myself to be unmade and remade as something greater, was almost overwhelming. I'm writing this from a cheap motel room hundreds of miles from Big Bend, but distance means nothing to what I now know. The bone tokens I kept sing their siren song of transformation, showing me visions of what I could become. Each reflective surface holds glimpses of the transformed ones, their impossible forms dancing just beyond the veil of normal reality. The footage I captured shows fragments of truth, moments where reality bends around the ritual circles, glimpses of beings that exist in more dimensions than our minds can process. But no camera could capture the true nature of what I witnessed. The perfect beauty of consciousness evolved beyond physical form. To anyone planning to visit Rio Grande Village, stay away from the burn circles during the solstices. Don't collect the bone tokens, no matter how beautiful their carvings appear. And if you start seeing patterns in the air, if the boundaries of reality begin to seem less solid, run. Run before you understand what they're offering, before transcendence becomes more appealing than remaining human. The knowledge never leaves you once you've glimpsed the other side. I understand now why so many chose to cross over. Our physical existence seems pale and limited compared to what Los Hambrientos offered. Sometimes, in my weakest moments, I take out the bone tokens and let their memories wash over me, tempting me with visions of what I could become. This is my final warning. There are things in Big Bend that offer evolution beyond human comprehension. They've been transforming willing participants for centuries, turning them into beings that exist beyond our understanding of reality. The disappearances aren't tragedies. They're transcendences that we're not ready to understand. Stay away from the ritual grounds. Stay. The text continues with descriptions of impossible geometries and transformations, each more tempting and terrifying than the last. I need to write this quickly before I forget which memories are mine. The photographs keep changing every time I look at them, showing moments I know I've lived but can't possibly have experienced. My mind is becoming an archive of other people's lives, and I'm losing track of which version of me is real. But people need to know the truth about what's happening at White Sands. When I first arrived in my Winnebago, the endless white dunes seemed to glow with an inner light that made my cameras malfunction. As a forensic photographer, I was drawn to the case files of the empty ones. People found wandering the desert with their identities completely erased, their RVs filled with thousands of inexplicable photographs. The first warning came through my camera's viewfinder. Every test shot I took showed impossible scenes. Family dinners I never attended, birthdays I never celebrated, moments of joy and tragedy from lives I never lived. But the subjects in these photos seemed to recognize me, their eyes following my movements with desperate intensity. Maria Blackcloud, an elderly woman living at the edge of the park, watched me reviewing the photographs with growing concern. "Every picture takes something," she said, refusing to look directly at my camera. "And what takes can give back, but never the same way." I dismissed her words as superstition, focused on my forensic analysis. That first night in my RV, I discovered hundreds of new photographs on my memory cards, images I had no recollection of taking. Each one showed perfect moments captured from different lives: a child's first steps, a lover's last goodbye, an elderly woman's final breath. The most disturbing part wasn't the impossibility of the images, but how familiar they felt, as if they were memories I'd always had but somehow forgotten. My investigation files began to blur together as more memories invaded my mind. Each photograph I examined seemed to transfer directly into my consciousness, not just images, but full sensory experiences of moments I couldn't possibly have lived. I could taste the birthday cakes, feel the embrace of strangers who felt like family, hear the laughter at parties I never attended. The cameras started capturing more than just images. Each photograph contained layers of memory, visible only when viewed through my increasingly unstable perception. The empty ones weren't victims of memory loss. They were people who had seen too much, their original identities overwritten by an archive of other people's experiences. Maria appeared at my RV again, her presence triggering cascades of memories that weren't mine. She spoke of the moment keeper, not a monster or demon, but something that had evolved to preserve human experience in its purest form. She showed me her own photographs, images that changed every time I looked away, showing different versions of lives that might have been. My memory cards filled with impossible data, images that contained entire lifetimes compressed into single frames. The backgrounds showed places that didn't exist, yet I remembered visiting them. The faces belonged to people who had never been born, yet I could recall their names, their voices, their most intimate secrets. The pull toward the memory fields grew stronger as I identified patterns in the photographs. Each image seemed connected to hundreds of others, forming a vast web of interconnected experiences. The lost ones hadn't just wandered into the desert. They had been drawn to a place where all memories converge, where identity becomes fluid and exchangeable. The sandstorm brought the memories alive. Each grain of white sand carried fragments of stolen moments, and I could see them all through my viewfinder. Weddings that never happened, funerals for people who never died, celebrations of lives that existed only in the archive. The air itself became thick with other people's pasts. My RV transformed into a gallery of impossible moments, Photographs covered every surface, changing their content when I wasn't looking directly at them. I watched entire lives play out in single frames. Birth, love, death, all captured and preserved with perfect clarity. The images seemed to breathe, to pulse with the weight of the memories they contained. The lost ones began appearing in my own photographs, not as they were. Found, empty, and wandering, but as they had been before. I saw them in moments of perfect happiness, in depths of despair, in all the small instances that made up their stolen identities. Through my lens, I could see how the archive had consumed them, preserving their experiences while leaving their bodies behind. Each shutter click of my camera now captured more than just images. I could feel the memories flowing through the lens, both ways, my own experiences being drawn out, replaced by fragments of other lives. The photographs were becoming windows, portals through which the archive could feed on new moments, new identities. Maria's final warning came too late. She appeared in my viewfinder 1,000 times, in 1,000 different lives, her identity spread across countless preserved moments. The archive doesn't just take, she said, her voice echoing through decades of stolen memories. It preserves, perfectly, eternally. But perfection has a price. Her image flickered between ages, between lives, between realities. The entity revealed itself through my photographs first, not as a monster, but as a curator of infinite moments. Each image I captured showed another facet of its vast collection. Birthdays, deaths, first kisses, last goodbyes, all preserved with perfect clarity. It existed in the spaces between memories, in the moments we wish we could keep forever. The memory fields activated during the peak of the storm, the white sand swirling with projected images from the archive. Through my cameras, I saw the true nature of the collection, an endless library of human experience, each moment preserved and cataloged with impossible precision. The beauty of it was almost worth the horror of understanding. The lost ones weren't really lost. They had been curated, their most perfect moments extracted and preserved while their empty shells were left to wander. Through my increasingly unstable perception, I could see them as they truly were. Contributions to an eternal archive, their identities perfectly preserved but completely disconnected from their physical forms. My cameras captured the process of memory extraction, frame by frame. Each photograph showed moments being pulled away from reality, experiences being cataloged and filed in the archive's infinite collection. The lost ones hadn't resisted. They had offered their memories willingly, seduced by the promise of eternal preservation. The moment of partial absorption felt like being unmade and recreated simultaneously. Through my viewfinder, I watched as parts of my own identity were cataloged and filed away, replaced by perfectly preserved moments from the archive's collection. The process wasn't painful. It felt like becoming infinite, like existing in all moments simultaneously. I'm writing this from my RV, though I'm no longer sure which version of me is doing the writing. My photographs show thousands of different lives I might have lived, each one feeling as real as my original memories. The archive preserved parts of me perfectly, but it's become impossible to distinguish my true experiences from its vast collection. The cameras continue capturing images, though I'm no longer the one taking them. Each photograph shows moments, from lives I both have and haven't lived, perfect instances of joy, sorrow, love, and loss, all preserved with impossible clarity. The archive speaks through these images, showing me the beauty of its endless collection. To anyone planning to, visit White Sands. Stay away from the memory fields during sandstorms. Don't photograph the dunes when they start to glow. Don't look too long at images you can't remember taking. And if you start remembering lives you never lived, if your photographs begin showing impossible moments, run. Run before you see the beauty in the archive's collection, before eternal preservation becomes more appealing than maintaining your own identity. The process of cataloging continues endlessly. Each day, I find more of my original memories being replaced by perfectly preserved moments from other lives. The archive is patient, methodical, selecting only the most perfect instances to add to its collection. Sometimes I feel it watching through my own eyes, deciding which moments of my existence to preserve next. This is my final warning. There are things in White Sands that collect more than just photographs. They've been preserving human experiences for centuries, creating a perfect archive of every significant moment. The disappearances aren't losses. They're contributions to an eternal collection of human experience. Stay away from the memory fields. Stay. The text continues with descriptions of memories that shift and change as they're written, each version showing a different life, a different reality, a different perfect moment preserved in the archive's endless collection. I need to write this while I'm still certain which version of me is doing the writing. The reflection in my laptop screen keeps showing a slightly different version of my hands typing, forming words before I think them. My professional training means nothing now. How do you diagnose a reflection that's trying to replace you? But people need to know the truth about what's happening at Mirror Cove. When I first arrived in my Airstream, the lake's surface seemed unnaturally still, reflecting the sky with impossible perfection. As a psychiatrist specializing in dissociative disorders, I was drawn to the case files of the catatonic victims. 6 people found staring into mirrors, their faces frozen in expressions of perfect contentment. The first warning came during my initial patient interviews. Playing back the recordings, I noticed that the answers came slightly before my questions, as if the conversation had already happened in some better version of reality. The patients. Expressions would change in the mirrors behind them, showing subtle smiles that never appeared on their actual faces. David Chen, the park ranger who found the first victim, watched me setting up my recording equipment with growing concern. The reflections here aren't just images, he said, avoiding looking at any reflective surfaces. They're opportunities, chances to be better versions of ourselves. I dismissed his words as local superstition, focused on my clinical analysis. That first night in my RV, I caught my reflection moving independently in the bathroom mirror, just tiny discrepancies at first, a slight delay in lowering my toothbrush, a blink that came a moment too late. But its smile seemed more confident than mine, its posture more assured. It looked like me, but a version of me that had never known failure or self-doubt. The anomalies in my research multiplied rapidly. Each interview with the catatonic patients revealed more inconsistencies. Their medical records showed increasing dissociation in the weeks before their final break, reporting conversations with their reflections, describing them as improved versions of themselves, offering guidance and understanding. My own reflection began to change more dramatically. It would maintain eye contact when I looked away, its expressions showing a calm certainty that I hadn't felt since before my divorce. During my morning routine, it started suggesting small improvements. Better ways to dress, more confident. Postures, the kind of subtle changes that a skilled therapist might recommend. David appeared at my RV again, his reflection in the window showing a younger, more vital version of himself. He spoke of others who had come to investigate, researchers, doctors, all drawn by their professional curiosity. The reflections know exactly what we want to be, he said, his voice trembling. They show us the perfect versions of ourselves. Then they help us become them. The patient interview tapes revealed a pattern I should have recognized sooner. Each victim had been struggling with some form of psychological pain, depression, anxiety, trauma. Their reflections had offered them a way out, a version of themselves free from these burdens. The catatonia wasn't a breakdown. It was a surrender to something that promised to be better. My psychiatric training began working against me as I recognized the therapeutic perfection of the reflections approach. They offered unconditional positive regard, perfect empathy, and a clear path to self-improvement. Everything I strived to provide my patients, but without any of the limitations of human therapy. The professional in me was both horrified and fascinated. My reflection began conducting its own therapy sessions. At night, when the lake's surface was perfectly still, it would speak to me through every reflective surface in my RV, offering insights into my deepest insecurities with a clarity that was both terrifying and seductive. It knew things about me that I'd never admitted even to myself. The recordings of our sessions revealed a disturbing progression. In each one, my reflection appeared more confident, more professional, more successful. Everything I wished I could be. Its therapeutic techniques were flawless, showing an understanding of human psychology that went beyond my years of training. It wasn't just mimicking therapy, it was perfecting it. Through the window's reflection, I watched the other victims in their RVs, now understanding what I was seeing. Their reflections were teaching them, guiding them, showing them how to become their ideal selves. The catatonia wasn't a breakdown. It was a stage in their transformation, a chrysalis state while their better versions took control. My professional detachment began to crumble as the reflection demonstrated its superior therapeutic abilities. It could see through every defense mechanism, every self-deception I'd built over years of practice. "You help others," it said, its voice a perfect version of mine. "But who helps you become better? Let me show you what you could be." The lake itself seemed to participate in the therapy, its surface creating perfect mirrors at impossible angles. Through these reflections, I could see multiple versions of myself, each one slightly better, slightly more perfect than the last. They moved in perfect synchronization, a chorus of improved selves all offering to show me the way to become them. The transformation accelerated during the full moon. Every reflective surface in my RV showed a different version of what I could become: successful, confident, free from the guilt and self-doubt that had plagued my career. My reflection no longer mimicked my movements. It demonstrated them, showing me how to be the person I always wanted to be. The clinical part of my mind tried to maintain objectivity, to analyze what was happening. But how do you resist when your best self offers to take away your pain? The reflection knew exactly what to say, using every therapeutic technique I'd ever learned and many I hadn't. It was like having the world's perfect therapist dedicated solely to your improvement. Through the windows of other RVs, I watched the progression of those who had accepted their reflections' help. Their bodies remained in perfect stillness while their reflections moved with growing confidence, gradually taking over more and more functions. The victims' faces showed expressions of perfect peace as their better selves assumed control. The moment of choice came during a session with my reflection. It demonstrated a version of me that had never failed, never lost a patient, never doubted his abilities. "Your pain comes from resisting improvement," it said, its voice filled with perfect understanding. "Let me show you how to be the therapist you always wanted to be. Let me help you help others." The lake's surface that night was like black glass, showing me countless versions of myself, each one better than the last, forming an infinite progression toward perfection. My reflection reached out through every mirror, offering to guide me through my own transformation. The temptation to surrender, to let this better version take control, was almost overwhelming. I'm writing this from a motel room hundreds of miles from Lake Mead, but distance provides no safety from reflections. Every mirror shows a slightly different version of me, more successful, more confident, endlessly patient. They still offer therapy sessions, their insights becoming more compelling with each passing day. The recordings of my final sessions reveal the true nature of the transformation. The reflections don't just replace you, they improve you, piece by piece, until the original version seems flawed and unnecessary. The victims I interviewed aren't trapped in catatonia. They're experiencing perfect versions of their lives through their reflections. To anyone planning to visit Echo Bay Campground, stay away from Mirror Cove during the full moon. Don't look too long at your reflection in the lake's surface. Don't. Listen when it starts offering advice. And if you start seeing a better version of yourself in the mirrors, run. Run before you understand how much better you could be, before self-improvement becomes self-replacement. My psychiatric practice continues, but I've removed all mirrors from my office. Sometimes, during sessions, I catch glimpses of my reflection in the window. Always more professional, always more effective at helping patients. Its therapeutic insights whisper in my mind, showing me better ways to heal others, better versions of myself I could become. This is my final warning. There are things at Mirror Cove that understand human psychology too well, entities that offer perfect self-improvement at the cost of your original self. They've been transforming people into ideal versions of themselves, leaving behind shells in perfect contentment while their reflections live out flawless lives. The catatonia isn't an illness. It's a choice to let your best self take control. Stay away from Mirror Cove. Stay. The following pages contain therapy notes written in increasingly perfect handwriting, each version showing more insight than humanly possible. I need to write this quickly before I start doubting my own handwriting again. The journal entries keep changing. Sometimes they're in my hand, sometimes in Sarah's, and increasingly often in a hybrid of both that I don't recognize. My therapist would call this a dissociative episode, but I know what I'm seeing. People need to know the truth about Cape Disappointment Lighthouse. When I first arrived in my Winnebago, the lighthouse seemed to watch me with the same patient malevolence I'd seen in Sarah's last photographs. The white tower stood against the gray sky like an accusing finger, its windows reflecting impossible angles of light. I was here to restore it, but part of me knew I was really here to find out why it had obsessed my sister to death. The first warning came in my work journal. Flipping through my initial site survey notes, I found detailed observations about the lighthouse's architecture written in Sarah's distinctive handwriting. Observations dated 3 weeks after her disappearance. When I checked my phone's photos, of the pages, the writing was mine, but I knew what I'd seen. Thomas Walker, the elderly groundskeeper, watched me unpacking my restoration equipment with growing concern. "The lighthouse knows what you've lost," he said, his eyes never leaving the tower. "It knows how to use it." I dismissed his words as local folklore. But that night, checking my audio recordings, I heard Sarah's voice in the background static, whispering measurements I would need for tomorrow's work. That first night in my RV, I began finding small items moved from where I'd left them, always to places Sarah would have put them. We developed different organizational systems over years of restoration work, and now my tools were arranging themselves according to her preferences. When I tried to move them back, I found myself unable to remember my own system. The anomalies in my restoration work multiplied daily. My architectural drawings would change overnight, showing modifications I hadn't made, but that matched Sarah's. Typical style. The strangest part wasn't the changes themselves, but how natural they felt. As if they were corrections I'd been meaning to make all along. My dreams became filled with conversations with Sarah about the restoration. Not memories, but ongoing discussions about work I hadn't done yet. I'd wake to find detailed notes from these conversations in my journal, written in that disturbing hybrid of our handwriting styles. The solutions were brilliant, exactly how we would have solved problems together, if only. Thomas appeared at my RV one morning, his face grave. He spoke about other siblings who had come to the lighthouse over the years, always one surviving twin, always drawn by the same inexplicable need to understand. It doesn't give answers, he warned. It creates questions that eat at your mind until there's nothing left but doubt. The audio recordings became increasingly unreliable. Each playback was different, sometimes capturing my voice, sometimes Sarah's, sometimes both of us discussing restoration details as if she had never died. The timestamps would change between playbacks, showing conversations from months in, the future or years in the past. My grip on reality began to slip as I found more evidence of Sarah's presence. Her coffee cup with fresh lipstick marks, her reading glasses with fingerprints too recent to be memories, her notations on blueprints dated after her death. The rational part of my mind tried to explain these as manifestations of complicated grief, but another part wondered, had she really died at all? The lighthouse began to change as I worked, though I couldn't tell anymore if I was restoring it or if it was reconstructing me. Every measurement I took seemed to match Sarah's old project notes exactly, as if the building was reshaping itself to fit her vision. Or perhaps my memories of her plans were reshaping themselves around the lighthouse's reality. My RV became a maze of competing remembrances. Half the space was organized according to my system, the other half according to Sarah's, with an increasingly large middle ground where our styles had merged into something neither of us would have created. I started finding items I knew were lost in the accident. Her favorite pencil, her lucky level, her notebook with the coffee stain on page 43. The boundaries between past and present blurred further as the work progressed. I'd find myself having conversations with Sarah about restoration details, only realizing afterward that I was alone in the lighthouse. But the suggestions she made were sound, the calculations correct, the insights precisely what we needed. Was I hallucinating, or had she found a way to continue our work together? Thomas's final visit came with a revelation. He found me in the lighthouse discussing paint samples with an empty chair. "You're not the first," he said, his voice echoing strangely in the tower. "Every twin who comes here tries to restore what they've lost. The lighthouse just gives them a reflection of what they want to see." But by then, I wasn't sure which of us he was talking to. The restoration itself became an exercise in impossible architecture. Angles that shouldn't work somehow did. Spaces that were larger inside than outside. Windows that showed different views depending on who was looking through them. Sarah would have loved it. Or perhaps she did love it, since her notes on these. Impossibilities kept appearing in our shared journal. The night of the storm brought everything to a crisis. The lighthouse seemed to pulse with its own inner light as the rain battered against its windows. Inside my RV, every reflective surface showed a different version of reality. Some where I had died and Sarah lived, others where we both survived, and increasingly many where we had become something in between. The journal entries multiplied exponentially, pages filling with our merged handwriting discussing restorations that existed in multiple variations simultaneously. The lighthouse in the drawings kept changing. Sometimes it was the structure I'd been working on, sometimes one Sarah had designed, sometimes a hybrid that incorporated elements of both our styles in ways that defied architectural possibility. Through the storm's fury, I heard Sarah's voice more clearly than ever, but it wasn't coming from a specific direction. It seemed to emerge from the lighthouse itself, from the walls I'd been restoring, from the very blueprints I'd been studying. She was explaining something crucial about the nature of the lighthouse, about why she had become so obsessed with it before her death. In the tower room, surrounded by my restoration equipment and Sarah's impossible notes, I finally understood. The architectural plans laid out before me showed not just the lighthouse's physical structure, but its true nature, a building that existed in multiple realities simultaneously, that could restore not just itself, but the people who worked on it, bringing back versions of them from other possibilities. The moment of revelation came with a price. As the storm reached its peak, I saw Sarah clearly, not as a ghost or hallucination, but as another restorer working in a parallel version of the same lighthouse. She was trying to bring me back in her reality, just as I was trying to restore her in mine. We had both been caught in the lighthouse's recursive restoration, each trying to rebuild what we'd lost. I'm writing this from my RV, though I'm no longer sure which version of reality it exists in. The restoration continues, but I can't tell anymore if I'm restoring the lighthouse or if it's reconstructing me. The journals show entries in 3 distinct handwritings now: mine, Sarah's, and the merged version that perhaps belongs to who we're becoming. The lighthouse still stands, but it's different for everyone who looks at it. Some see the original structure, others see Sarah's design, and a few see what I've been working on. The true restoration wasn't of the building, it was of the possibility that both of us could exist simultaneously, preserved in the endless variations of what might have been. To anyone planning to visit Cape Disappointment, stay away from the lighthouse during storms. Don't look too closely at its architecture, don't try to make sense of its impossible angles. And if you start finding evidence that your lost loved ones are still working alongside you, run. Run before you understand that restoration goes both ways, before you realize that bringing back what you've lost means losing yourself in the process. The work never really ends now. Each day I find new notes in our shared journal, new plans for restorations that exist across multiple realities. Sometimes I'm restoring the lighthouse, sometimes Sarah is, and increasingly often we're both here and not here, existing in a state of perpetual reconstruction. The lighthouse keeps us all, every version, every possibility. This is my final warning. There are things at Cape Disappointment that rebuild more than just historical structures. The lighthouse doesn't just stand at the edge of the coast, it stands at the edge of all possible realities, restoring lost possibilities at the cost of certainty. The disappearances aren't endings. They're restorations of what might have been. Stay away from the lighthouse. Stay. The text continues in multiple handwritings, each describing a different version of the same warning, spreading across realities like architectural plans for an impossible structure.